The widow loved him in silence for 20 years, until he returned and gave her a family and a home. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The wind pressed hard against the small stone cottage on the hill, carrying the grey scent of coal and cold. Inside, Mary Collins stitched by the dim light of a single lamp, her fingers moving with quiet precision over a worn piece of fabric. The sound of the needle filled the silence. It was the sound of her life, measured, patient, endless. She paused only to glance toward the window, where the world was fading into snow and dusk. Thomas had not come home yet from the forge. He was 17 now, taller than she had expected him to grow, with his father's stubborn jaw and a gentleness that wasn't his father's at all. Mary smiled faintly, folded the fabric and set it aside. Her hands were stiff from years of sewing. Every night ended this way. Work finished, a lamp burning low, and her eyes drifting toward the horizon that hid the road from the old Blackwood estate. No one lived there anymore. The manor stood silent on the opposite ridge. A great house turned into a ghost. She sometimes thought she heard it breathing in the wind. That house had once been her whole world, before war, before silence, before she learned what it meant to wait for someone who would never return. When the latch clicked, she looked up quickly. It was only Thomas, his cheeks flushed with cold. "They kept me late," he said, hanging his coat near the fire. "Mr. Avery's mare threw a shoe again." She nodded. "You should eat." He sat, wolfed down the stew she'd kept warm, and talked about the forge, the horses, and the blacksmith's bad temper. She listened, answering softly, her eyes on his face. He had no idea how much of her heart was built around him, how many years of sorrow had turned into his laughter. When he went to bed, the house fell quiet again. Outside, the wind rose. Mary added wood to the fire and sat near it, sewing once more. Her thoughts wandered as they always did, back to the memory that had shaped everything. A young man on a horse, promising, "I'll come back for you, Mary. Wait for me." She had been 19. The world had been full of light then. A sudden knock made her jump. It came again, firm, uneven. No one ever came this far up the hill at night. She stood, the needle still between her fingers, and looked toward the door. For a heartbeat, she thought it must be Thomas forgetting something, but the voice that followed was not his. "Please," it said rough and low. "I need shelter." Her breath caught. She hesitated, then opened the door halfway. The wind burst in, carrying snow and the figure of a man hunched against it. He looked enormous in the doorway, a traveler wrapped in a torn coat, his boots heavy with mud. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "The road. There was a storm coming. I saw the light." Mary stepped back. "Come in then, quickly." He entered, dripping melted snow onto the floor. When he pushed back his hood, she saw a face marked by years, deep lines, tired eyes, a faint scar along his jaw. But beneath the weariness, there was something hauntingly familiar. She stared, trying to place him, but memory was cruel. It reached for what it feared to find. He looked around the small room. "You live alone?" "My son and I," she said quietly. "You'll have to make do with simple comfort. The fire is small, but it's warm. Warm is enough." She poured him tea, watching his trembling hands wrap around the cup. His clothes were travel-worn, but not poor. The way he carried himself, upright even in exhaustion, spoke of a man raised to command, not to beg. After a long silence, he said, "It's strange, I remember this valley, the sound of the wind here, it hasn't changed." Mary froze. "You know Yorkshire, then?" He nodded. "I grew up here." His eyes lifted to hers. "Do you remember the Blackwood estate?" Her throat tightened. "Everyone does. The house still stands." He smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. "I used to live there. Long ago." Something in her chest gave way. She set the teapot down before she could drop it. "What did you say your name was?" "I didn't," he replied softly. Then he looked at her fully, the firelight catching his eyes. Grey, storm-worn eyes she had once known better than her own. "Mary," he whispered, as if testing the word. Her knees went weak. "Edward." The cup slipped from her fingers and shattered. He rose instantly. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to frighten you." She shook her head, unable to speak. The years rushed back in a wave. The summer afternoons in the orchard, his laughter, the stolen letter that never came, the long nights praying for news that never arrived. I thought you were dead, she managed at last. I nearly was, he said, many times. He told her little, only that war and exile had swallowed him, that he'd returned now to settle his father's affairs. The rest he left unsaid. His voice carried the sound of regret, too deep for words. Mary moved to the window. The storm was thick outside. Snow swept sideways across the fields. You can stay the night, she said finally. There's a cot by the fire. Thank you. She fetched blankets while he removed his boots. The sight of his hands, scarred, stronger than before, made her chest ache. Time had changed him, but not completely. Somewhere behind the weariness lived the man she had loved. When she returned, he was studying the small room. You've made a good home, he said. It feels safe, she didn't answer. The word safe meant little to her. Nothing in her life had ever truly been that. The clock ticked. The fire crackled. He sat, she stood, and 20 years of silence hung between them. Finally he asked, Did you ever marry, Mary? She hesitated. Yes. He swallowed hard. I see. He died some years ago, she added, her tone calm, almost distant. I'm sorry. For what? For the years that passed, or for not being among them? He flinched. For both. The words left them suspended in a fragile peace. She turned toward the small room where Thomas slept. My son doesn't wake easily. You'll not disturb him. He nodded. You have a son. Yes. Something unreadable crossed his face. He's lucky to have you. She studied him, sensing the unspoken question behind his words. He has his father's name, she said, as if to close the subject. Edward looked away, his jaw tightening. Of course. Mary knelt by the hearth to add more wood. It's strange, she murmured. After so long I imagined I'd forgotten your voice, but I didn't. He watched her hands. I imagined you'd hate me. I tried, she said simply. It didn't last. The storm deepened outside. The wind howled like an old ghost, pushing snow against the windows. She rose, brushing her skirt. You should rest. You look exhausted. I will, he said. But may I ask one thing? She hesitated. What is it? When you looked at me just now, was it anger or kindness? Neither, she said. It was memory. He nodded slowly, as though he understood too well. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he added, I shouldn't have come here. You're here now, she replied, and the road's too dangerous to ride in this weather. Stay till morning. After that, the hill will let you go. He smiled faintly. The hill and you, both as unkind as ever. Her lips curved despite herself. Go to sleep, Edward. She left him by the fire and walked down the narrow hallway. The floor creaked under her feet. In Thomas's room, the boy slept deeply, one hand over his chest. She watched him for a long moment, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. When she turned, she saw Edward's shadow against the flicker of the firelight in the next room. She closed the door gently and leaned her back against it. Her hands trembled. It felt impossible that he was truly there. Flesh and breath, his voice filling the same air she breathed. But in her heart, confusion spread like warmth and pain combined. Hours later, when the storm eased, she found herself unable to sleep. She walked to the main room again. Edward was awake, sitting by the dying fire. You should rest, she said quietly. He looked up. So should you. They both smiled, tired, uncertain smiles that belonged to people who had already lived too much life. I keep wondering, he said, staring into the embers, how many times you waited at that window. I imagined you forgot me after the first winter. Every morning, she said, almost to herself, I told myself you'd come back. And every night I told myself you wouldn't. He looked at her as if the years vanished. If I could undo it, you can't. No, he agreed softly, but I can tell you the truth. The truth is, you left, she said. Nothing changes that. He bowed his head. You're right. And yet, here I am. Silence again. The kind of silence that holds more than words. After a moment, she said, You'll leave at dawn. Yes. Where will you go? To the estate, he said. What's left of it? I have matters to settle. My father's death left things undone. Mary turned away. Then that's where you belong. I don't know where I belong anymore. His voice was soft, almost broken. Something in it made her chest ache again. She gathered her shawl and whispered, "Good night, Edward." He didn't answer, only watched her walk away. When she reached her door, she heard him say quietly, "I never stopped thinking of you." She stopped, but didn't turn. "Go to sleep." The firelight flickered, and the house fell still again. In the half-darkness of her room, she lay awake, listening to the sound of the wind against the windows and the faint rhythm of another person's breathing in the next room. It had been so long since the house had held more than her and her son. She told herself it was only for one night. But when morning came, the storm had left the valley white and silent. Edward was still asleep by the fire, his face turned toward the light, as if the years had finally stopped chasing him. Thomas came running from his room, rubbing his eyes. "Mother, there's someone here." "Yes," she said quickly. "He was caught in the storm. Let him rest." Thomas peered at the stranger curiously. "He looks like someone I've seen before." Mary froze. "Where?" "I don't know," the boy said, shrugging. "Maybe in town, or in one of those old paintings at the manor. The ones no one's allowed to see." Edward stirred, waking slowly. His eyes met the boy's. Thomas grinned. "Morning, sir." Edward smiled faintly. "Morning." Mary busied herself at the stove, trying not to look at either of them. Her heart was hammering too fast. Thomas leaned closer, studying him. "You're not from around here, are you?" Edward shook his head. "Not anymore." The boy tilted his head. "How do you know my mother?" Edward's gaze shifted to Mary. For a long moment neither spoke. Then, very softly, he said, "We knew each other a long time ago." Thomas nodded, satisfied with the mystery. "Mother knows everyone," he said proudly, grabbing a slice of bread. Mary tried to smile. "Eat your breakfast." As Thomas sat at the table, Edward rose slowly, stretching stiff limbs. He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Mary," she turned. His voice was quiet but certain, carrying all the weight of years lost. "Is he your son?" Mary didn't answer right away. Her hands tightened around the edge of the table, and for a moment, the only sound was the pop of the fire. Thomas glanced between them, confused by the tension that filled the room. Edward's question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. "Yes," Mary said finally, her voice even. "He's my son." Edward nodded, though his eyes didn't leave hers. "Of course." Thomas looked up. "Why are you asking that?" Edward smiled faintly. "Curiosity. You look like a good young man." The boy shrugged and went back to his breakfast, but Mary could feel Edward's gaze on her. He wanted to ask more, but he didn't. There were too many years between them, too much unsaid. After breakfast, Thomas left for the forge. As soon as the door closed, Edward spoke quietly. "He's not like the man you married, is he?" Mary stiffened. "You remember too much for someone who's been gone 20 years. "I remember everything," he said. "I remember the day you told me you'd never love anyone else, and I remember the letter I sent you, promising to return." Her voice was sharp. "You promised many things." He winced. "My father stopped the letters. I wrote again and again. He made sure you'd never receive them. I didn't know until much later." Mary folded her arms. "And when you found out? Did you come back?" "I couldn't," he said. "He sent me to the colonies. I was under his command until the end." She looked at him with disbelief. "And now you expect me to believe that after all this time?" "No," he said quietly. "I expect nothing. I came here to see for myself what remained." Mary turned away, staring out the window where snow still covered the hills. "What remains?" she repeated softly. "Only what you left behind." Edward stepped closer but didn't touch her. "You think I don't see how much I've lost? How much you've lost?" "I don't need your pity, Edward." "It's not pity, it's guilt." She faced him then, her eyes hard. "Then live with it. You earned it." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Edward sighed and moved toward the fire. "The war changes a man. I thought of this place every night, of you, of what I'd ruined. But you—" He stopped, shaking his head. "You've built something stronger than I ever could have given you." Mary ignored the ache his words stirred. "You said you came to settle your father's affairs. What kind of affairs bring you to my door?" "There are few who still remember me," he said. "Fewer who'd open their doors. I needed somewhere to start." "This is no place to start," she replied. "It's a place to finish what's already ended." He smiled faintly. "You still talk like that. Quietly. but every word cuts. She picked up her sewing to hide her trembling hands. "You're welcome to the fire, but don't mistake kindness for forgiveness. I wouldn't dare." The day passed in silence. Edward helped chop wood without being asked. He moved carefully as if afraid to take up too much space. When Thomas returned, the boy watched him with curiosity, asking questions about the war, the cities, the ships. Edward answered with patience, never speaking of violence, only of places and faces long gone. That evening, Thomas leaned toward his mother. "He's kind, isn't he?" Mary nodded. "He's a guest." The boy smiled. "He doesn't act like one." When Thomas went to bed, Edward sat near the fire again. "He's bright," he said softly. "You've done well, Mary." "I did what I had to," she said. "There's no praise in survival." He nodded, staring into the flames. "Do you ever wonder how it might have been?" "No," she said too quickly. "Wondering doesn't change what is." "I used to think the same," he said. "Then I stopped trying to forget." She gave him a sharp look. "Don't speak to me of forgetting. I had to live with every day you were gone, every whisper, every door closed in my face after you left. I didn't know. You should have," she said. "If you had truly meant to come back, nothing could have stopped you." His expression darkened. "You think I didn't try? I think you didn't fight hard enough." He leaned forward, his voice low. "There are things you don't understand. Promises I made, debts I couldn't break. My father—" "Your father is dead," she interrupted. "Let him rest. The damage was done long before his grave was dug." He flinched, but didn't argue. The fire crackled between them, loud and alive. Finally, he said, "I came here because I needed a place that felt real again. The estate is empty. The house echoes with ghosts. But here, there's warmth. There's life." Mary's tone softened, despite herself. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" "Because you'll leave again," she said, "and I can't watch you go twice." He stared at her for a long moment. "Then tell me to leave now." She looked away. "You'll stay until the weather clears." A quiet smile touched his lips. "That's mercy enough." Days passed like that. Short, grey days with little light. Edward helped repair the fence, carried water, fixed the roof where snow had weighed it down. The villagers began to whisper. A stranger at Mary Collins's cottage was a story that spread fast in the small valley. When Mary went to town for supplies, Mrs. Graham, the grocer's wife, stopped her near the counter. "I heard you've got company," she said, her tone sweet but sharp. "A gentleman, no less. Not many widows entertain travelers, Mary." Mary kept her eyes on the coins in her hand. "He was caught in the storm. It's only for a few days." Mrs. Graham leaned closer. "They say he's a Blackwood. Is it true?" Mary froze. "People say many things." "Well," Mrs. Graham said with a knowing smile, "it would be a fine story if the lady from the cottage took in the air of the manor. Finer still if the boy of hers has grey eyes like his." The coins clattered onto the counter. "That's enough," Mary said quietly. "Keep the change." She left without looking back. When she returned home, Edward was outside, mending the gate. "You shouldn't be doing that," she said, her voice still tight with anger. He looked up. "The hinges were rusted. It won't take long." "I mean, you shouldn't be seen doing it. The village talks." "They always did," he said. "Why should that matter now?" "Because I live here," she said. "I have to keep my name clean." He wiped his hands. "And mine is already dirty, so it balances out." She didn't smile. "You don't understand. People like me don't get to survive rumors." Edward walked closer. "Then let them talk. What can they take from you that hasn't already been taken?" She looked up at him, her eyes bright with frustration. "I think that's brave, but it's foolish. You'll go back to your estate and your affairs. I'll be left to pick up the ashes." He shook his head. "You think I have an estate left? The Blackwood name means nothing without the land, and the land is claimed by relatives who can't stand me." Mary frowned. "Then why did you come back?" He hesitated. "Because of a promise." "To whom?" He hesitated again, choosing his words carefully. "My father, before he died. There's something I must do to claim what remains. I can't explain yet." "Then don't," she said coldly. "I've had enough of your family's promises." He looked at her with quiet pain. "I deserve that." That night, the house was silent, except for the soft breathing of the fire. Mary sat by the window sewing. though her thoughts were elsewhere. Edward sat opposite her, the table between them like a line neither dared cross. He broke the silence. "Thomas doesn't know who I am." She didn't look up. "He doesn't need to. He deserves to. He deserves peace," she said. "Not questions that can't be answered." Edward's jaw tightened. "You're afraid. I'm careful." He leaned back. "He looks like you when he laughs." Mary put down her work. "Stop it, Edward." "Why?" "Because this isn't right. You're stirring up what's buried. Maybe it shouldn't have been buried." She stood. "You don't get to decide that." He rose too, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Tell me you never thought of me," he said quietly. Her voice shook. "I stopped thinking of you the day I realized you weren't coming back." "Liar." Her hand trembled. "Leave this house tomorrow." He exhaled, defeated. "If that's what you want, it's what's best." Neither moved for a moment, the space between them filled with all the years that couldn't be reclaimed. Then she turned away and went to her room, closing the door with a quiet finality that felt like breaking glass. When dawn came, Edward didn't leave. The road was still frozen, the snow too deep. He spent the day mending small things around the house without a word. Mary didn't stop him, but she didn't thank him either. That evening, Thomas came home early, his face red from the cold. "Mother, there's talk in the village," he said. "They say a lord is staying here. Is it true?" Mary looked at Edward, then back at her son. "He's just a traveller." Thomas frowned. "But people say he's a Blackwood." Edward's expression didn't change. "They're right," he said softly. "Edward Blackwood." The boy's eyes widened. "From the big house? The one up the valley?" "The same," Edward said. Thomas looked between them, puzzled. "Did you know each other before?" Mary said nothing. Edward smiled sadly. "A long time ago." Thomas grinned. "Then it's good you're friends again." Mary turned away quickly, her voice quiet. "Go wash up for supper." When the boy left, Edward spoke in a low voice. "He's clever. He'll start asking questions. Then you'll be gone before he finds answers," she said. He studied her for a long time, then nodded. "Tomorrow, then?" Mary swallowed. "Yes, tomorrow." But the next morning, the sound of hoofbeats broke the quiet before sunrise. Edward stepped outside and saw two men approaching on horseback, strangers in city coats. One of them handed him an envelope sealed with black wax. He read it slowly, his face pale against the cold. Mary came to the door. "What is it?" He looked up, eyes dark with something unspoken. "It's from my father's lawyer. There's a condition to the inheritance, a promise I made before he died." "What promise?" she asked. Edward's voice dropped to a whisper. "One that could ruin everything, Mary. I have to marry someone else." Mary stared at him as if she hadn't heard right. The cold air moved between them, lifting her hair, carrying the smoke from the chimney. "You have to what?" Edward folded the letter and slid it into his coat. "It was my father's final wish," he said. "He made me swear before he died. I didn't think it would come to this." Her voice came out thin. "Marry someone else." He didn't look at her. "It's complicated." "It always is," she said sharply. "That's what you said before you left for the war. That's what you said the day you rode away and promised to write." "Mary, please." She crossed her arms. Her cheeks flushed from anger more than cold. "No. If you came here looking for sympathy, you won't find it. You should have stayed in that grand house of yours and left the poor woman in the valley alone. I didn't know this would happen." "You never do." Thomas opened the door just then, rubbing his eyes. "Mother, what's going on?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Go back inside." Edward forced a smile at the boy. "It's just a letter from town. Bad news about an old friend." Thomas nodded, half asleep, and went back in. When the door closed, Edward turned to her again. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came to make things right." "Right," she repeated. "You think anything can make this right? You disappear for 20 years and now you stand here talking about duty and promises you made to another woman." He took a step closer, his voice low. "It isn't like that. I owe her family. You owe everyone but yourself," she said. "And you owe me more than anyone." The silence stretched between them. Then Edward said almost to himself, "If I refuse, the estate goes to my cousins. Everything my father built will be gone." Mary laughed without joy. "And what does that matter to me?" It matters because the estate employs half the valley, he said. If they take it, they'll sell the land, evict the tenants. You know what that means for these people. She shook her head slowly. You think you can save them by ruining yourself again? By chaining yourself to someone you don't love? Maybe this is what I deserve. Mary looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward the door. You always talk about what you deserve, never about what you want. He caught her arm gently. And what if what I want isn't possible? Then you'll learn to live with it, she said, pulling free. Like I did. She went inside, leaving him alone in the snow. Later that morning she found him by the fire, the letter spread open on the table. His face was hard, unreadable. What does it say? She asked quietly. He hesitated before answering. It's the same name I heard years ago, Margaret Whitby. Her father and mine made the arrangement before the war. I was supposed to marry her then. I refused. It cost me my inheritance. Mary's eyes narrowed. And now you'll give in. If I don't, the Blackwood name ends with me. Maybe it should, she said. He looked up sharply. You don't mean that. I do, she said. Your name brought nothing but pain. To you, to me, to everyone caught between your family's pride and their silence. He said nothing. The fire crackled. That afternoon, the villagers began to appear one by one under one excuse or another. A jar returned, a question about sewing, curious eyes, curious tongues. The valley always smelled gossip before the truth. Mrs. Graham arrived last, pretending kindness. I thought I'd check if you needed more flour, dear, she said sweetly. Her eyes drifted toward the tall man near the window. Oh, I see you have company. How wonderful. A gentleman, too. Mary straightened her back. Mr. Blackwood was leaving tomorrow. Blackwood? Mrs. Graham's brows shot up. As in the manor. The same, Edward said dryly. Well, the woman said, smiling with her lips and not her eyes, the valley hasn't seen a Blackwood in years. Some say the estate's cursed now. Maybe it needs a woman's touch to clean it up. Her gaze flicked toward Mary. Though I suppose you're too busy here. Mary forced a polite smile. Indeed. When Mrs. Graham left, Edward said, They'll talk. They already do, Mary replied. That evening, Thomas lingered by the fire. Mother, he said, Mr. Blackwood said he used to live up the valley. Does that mean he's rich? Edward smiled. Not as much as I used to be. Thomas grinned. I like him, Mother. He's not like the men in town. He listens. Mary's heart twisted. He'll be leaving soon. The boy frowned. Why? It's nicer when he's here. Edward met Mary's eyes over the boy's head. Because sometimes grown-ups have things they must do, Thomas, even if they don't want to. Edward's voice softened. Especially then. When Thomas went to bed, Mary spoke quietly. Don't fill his head with promises. I wouldn't, Edward said. He's a good boy. He deserves honesty. He deserves peace, she said again. And he won't have it if you stay. Edward rose from his chair. I'll leave in the morning, you have my word. She nodded but didn't look at him. At dawn, Mary watched from the window as he saddled his horse. She didn't go outside, didn't say goodbye. Thomas stood beside her, frowning. He didn't even eat breakfast. He has business, she said. When the sound of hooves faded, Thomas turned to her. You look sad. She touched his hair. It's nothing, love. Go to your work. After he left, she sat down, the silence pressing heavy around her. She told herself it was better this way. She had survived before. She would again. But the next afternoon, the sound of horses came again. 2 this time. She stepped to the door and froze. Edward was back, dismounting beside a man in a dark coat. I thought you'd gone, she said. I had to return something, he replied, handing her an envelope. It's your name. She frowned. My name. It's in this letter, he said. My father wrote it before he died. He meant for you to have it, but it was never sent. She hesitated, staring at the seal. Why would your father write to me? Because he knew what he'd done, Edward said. He stopped our letters, paid your husband to take you away from the valley. The world seemed to tilt. That's a lie. I wish it were, he said softly. He confessed on his deathbed. I found the letters in his study. Every word I wrote he kept. Mary's hands shook as she broke the seal. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lord Blackwood's heavy, elegant script. The words cut through her like ice. She read of her own life, arranged by the will of men she barely knew. Payments, instructions, a warning to keep her away from his son, for the good of the family. She couldn't speak. Edward watched her face pale. "I had to tell you," he said. "You deserved the truth." Her voice trembled. "And what am I supposed to do with it? Bury it beside him?" He took a step forward. "No, let it free you." "Free me?" she repeated bitterly. "You think one letter can give back 20 years? "No," he said, "but it might give us a chance to start again." She looked at him, tears bright in her eyes. "A chance? You stand here bound to another woman, carrying your father's ghosts, and you dare to speak of chances?" Edward's voice broke. "Because I can't stop loving you, Mary." She turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth to keep from crying. "You should have stopped a long time ago." He stepped closer, his tone rough. "If I could trade every acre of that land, every coin, just to undo what was done—" "But you can't," she said. "None of us can." They stood there, the fire between them, neither able to look away. Then Thomas's voice came from the hall. "Mother, is everything all right?" Mary quickly wiped her face. "Yes, darling. Go back to bed." When the boy disappeared again, she whispered, "You need to go, Edward. Please." He shook his head. "Not yet, there's something else. The lawyer will come tomorrow to read the will. I need to know what's truly mine and what isn't." "Then go to your grand house and do it," she said. "Leave us in peace." "I can't," he said quietly, "because whatever happens there will decide what happens to you." She frowned. "To me?" He hesitated, the truth heavy on his tongue. "My father left a condition about you in his will. If I claim the inheritance, I must fulfill his last command." "What command?" she demanded. He looked at her, pain in every word. "That I marry Margaret Whitby before the year is out, or everything, including your cottage, will belong to them." Mary felt the room spin. "My home?" "Yes," he said. "He wrote it himself. This land was once part of the estate. If the cousins take it, they'll drive you away." Her face went white. "You're telling me that my life, my son's life, depends on whether you marry another woman?" Edward's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." She stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. "Then there's nothing more to say." He tried to speak, but no words came. She turned away, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "Get out, Edward, before I forget what little forgiveness I have left." He stood for a moment, helpless, then moved toward the door. Outside, the snow began to fall again, covering his tracks almost as soon as he made them. Inside, Mary sank into the chair by the fire, staring at the flames until they blurred. She had no tears left, only the sound of the wind outside, whispering the same cruel truth it always had. But even through the storm, she could still hear his voice echoing in her mind. "I have to marry someone else." The next morning, the village was already stirring when Mary walked down the road to town. People turned to look. Whispers followed her like shadows. She kept her eyes forward, hands tight around the basket she carried, pretending not to hear. At the post office, Mrs. Graham was waiting as if she'd been standing there all morning. "Oh, Mary," she said with her syrupy smile. "You've heard, haven't you? The whole valley is talking about it." Mary set her basket down. "About what?" "About Lord Blackwood's son, the prodigal heir, back from the dead. And they say he's to marry Miss Margaret Whitby before Christmas. Quite the fine match." Mary didn't blink. "Then I wish him joy." Mrs. Graham leaned in, voice dropping. "Funny, though, that he's been seen up the hill with you. A man about to be married shouldn't visit widows alone, don't you think?" Mary's jaw tightened. "Do you need anything else, Mrs. Graham?" "Oh, no, dear, just thought you should know how tongues wag. Best to be careful." Mary picked up her basket and walked out without another word. The cold air outside felt sharper, cleaner. She walked quickly, head high, but by the time she reached home her hands were shaking. Through the window she saw Edward by the hearth with Thomas, showing him how to repair a loose hinge. They looked almost like father and son. The sight twisted something inside her. When she opened the door, both turned. "You're back early," Edward said. "I had enough of town," she said. "It's full of people who think they know more than they do." Thomas grinned. "Mr. Blackwood says he used to build things like this when he was my age." Edward smiled faintly. "Not quite like this. I had servants to fix things back then, but a man should learn to use his hands. Mary removed her coat. You shouldn't be filling his head with stories. Thomas looked puzzled. Why not? Because he needs to learn how the world really works, she said. Not how it used to be for people with money. Edward's expression darkened. You think that's all I ever was. Isn't it? He stood, his tone quiet. I lost everything that mattered long before the money went. Mary glanced at Thomas. Go wash up, love. Supper soon. When the boy disappeared, she turned back to Edward. You shouldn't be here when he's home. It's not right. I came to speak to you, he said. The lawyer arrives tonight. I'll go to the estate with him in the morning. Then speak quickly. He hesitated. I need you to understand. This marriage, this promise, it isn't love. It's debt. My father tied it to the land, to the tenants. If I refuse, they lose everything. The valley will be ruined. You can't save everyone, she said. You never could. Maybe not. But I won't see them suffer for my choices. And what of me, Edward? Of Thomas? Do we matter in this fine plan of yours? He flinched. You matter more than any of them. Then why do you still intend to marry her? Because I have no other way. She shook her head, stepping back. You always find a reason to call weakness duty. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Edward looked toward the window. That will be the lawyer. Moments later, the door opened without knocking. A short man in a long grey coat stepped in, brushing off the snow. Mr. Blackwood, he said briskly. I trust you've read the will. Edward nodded. I have. The man adjusted his spectacles. Then you know what must be done. The papers are prepared. We'll need your signature by morning. Mary spoke before Edward could. You'll have to do that elsewhere. This isn't your office. The lawyer blinked at her. Mrs. Collins, I presume. The cottage is on Blackwood land, technically part of the estate. Her back stiffened. Not anymore, it's my home. Edward stepped between them. That's enough, Mr. Price. We'll discuss this at the house. The lawyer sniffed. As you wish. But the terms are clear, sir. Miss Whitby expects your visit before the week ends. He gave a small bow to Mary and left. When the door closed, Mary let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He spoke of my home as if it were a ledger entry. Edward's voice was low. That's how my father saw everything. And now you'll marry into that world again, she said. A woman like her, Margaret Whitby. What would she want with a man who spent 20 years trying to forget his title? She doesn't want me, he said. She wants the name, the same as my father did. Then give it to her, Mary said bitterly, and be done with it. He moved closer, his voice rough. You don't mean that. I do, because if you stay here, you'll destroy what little peace I've managed to build. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If that's what you wish. That night, Thomas slept soundly, but Mary couldn't. She sat by the fire while Edward packed his things. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally he said, Do you remember the orchard behind the manor? The day you said yes to me under that apple tree? She kept her eyes on the fire. That girl is long gone, Edward. I remember the look on your face when I promised to come back. You believed me. I was a fool. He stepped closer. If I could stay, I would. But the moment I sign those papers, it's over. Everything I once owned will be secure, and I'll be trapped again. She rose, her voice barely above a whisper. Then don't sign them. He met her eyes. And lose the valley. Lose me instead, is that it? He didn't answer. She shook her head. I can't do this again. I won't wait another 20 years. He reached out, but she stepped back. Don't, she said. You've already taken enough from me. Edward's shoulders sagged. I never meant to. Intentions don't matter, she said. Go. He stood there, breathing hard, then nodded once. If I go now, I might reach the manor before midnight. The lawyer can stay there until morning. Do what you must. He hesitated at the door. Mary, don't say goodbye, she interrupted. It never means what it should. He gave her a look filled with everything he couldn't say, and stepped into the night. When the door closed, Mary sank into the chair, covering her face with her hands. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock and the wind outside. She stayed there until the lamp burned low, half hoping he would return, half dreading that he might. The next morning, the valley woke to another rumor. The heir of the Blackwood estate had been seen at the Whitby house, dining with Margaret herself. The servants whispered that the wedding date was already being discussed. Mary tried to ignore it. She buried herself in her work, sewing until her fingers bled. 3 days later, she was delivering a mended coat in town when she heard the sound of hooves behind her. She turned and saw a carriage gleaming black against the slush. A woman stepped out, her fur-lined cloak brushing the ground. "Mrs. Collins, I presume," said the woman, her voice cool and elegant. Mary recognized her instantly. Margaret Whitby. "Miss Whitby," Mary said, bowing her head slightly. "What brings you to this side of the valley?" Margaret smiled without warmth. "Curiosity, and perhaps in clarity. You see, I met with Mr. Blackwood yesterday. He spoke your name." Mary's heart thudded once. "Did he?" "He did," Margaret said, studying her. "He told me you were an old friend, but his tone, well, it wasn't quite the tone of friendship. I can't control what others imagine." Margaret's smile sharpened. "No, but you can avoid feeding the gossip. A woman in your position should be careful. The valley is small, and people talk." Mary met her eyes. "I've lived with their talk for 20 years. It can't hurt me now." "Perhaps," Margaret said, "but it can hurt him. Edward is a man of honor. Even if he's forgotten how to behave like one, he'll keep his promise. You should help him do that." Mary's voice stayed calm. "He doesn't need my help to make his choices." Margaret stepped closer. "Oh, but he does, because if he doesn't fulfill that promise, the estate will fall apart. And if that happens, your little cottage, your peace, your son's future, all of it will vanish. You see, Mrs. Collins, the world isn't kind to women who cling to ghosts." The words hit like a slap, but Mary didn't flinch. "Then you'll have your husband, Miss Whitby. I have no wish to keep him." Margaret gave a small, satisfied nod. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." She turned toward the carriage, then paused. "He speaks of you often. I wonder if he realizes that pity and love can sound so much alike." Mary didn't answer. She watched the carriage roll away until it vanished into the grey mist. That evening, Thomas came home late. His cheeks were red, his eyes bright. "Mother, you'll never believe who I saw, Mr. Blackwood. He was at the Whitby place. They say he's to marry her soon." Mary forced a smile. "That's good news, isn't it?" Thomas frowned. "He didn't look happy." "Not everyone marries for happiness," she said. "But he told me once that a man should follow his heart." She looked at him gently. "Then maybe he's learned that hearts don't always get to choose." The boy nodded, though he didn't understand. When he went to bed, Mary stood by the window, staring out at the dark valley. She told herself it didn't matter anymore. Whatever bond had tied her to Edward Blackwood was gone. But deep inside, she knew that wasn't true. Hours later, long after she'd doused the lamp, the faint echo of hooves reached her ears again. She sat up, heart pounding. Then came the knock at the door. She hesitated before opening it. Edward stood there, soaked with rain, his eyes wild with exhaustion and despair. "Mary," he said hoarsely, "I can't marry her." Rain poured off his coat in rivulets, pooling on the stone threshold. Mary stood frozen, holding the door half open. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I had to come." Edward's voice was rough, half broken. "I couldn't do it." "You mean you couldn't marry her?" He nodded once. "I tried to sign the papers, to do what was expected. But every word felt like betrayal." "You made a promise," she said. "You said it yourself, and I've made too many already. Promises to men who are gone, to ghosts who don't care what becomes of me, or you. You think defying them will change anything? They'll strip you of everything. The land, the house. Let them have it," he said, stepping closer. "What use is land without a heart to return to?" Mary's hand tightened on the door. "You should leave before someone sees you." "Let them see," he said. "I'm done hiding." She stared at him, her voice shaking. "You'll ruin what's left of your name." He gave a tired laugh. "That name ruined us long before tonight." She opened her mouth to argue, but something in his eyes stopped her. He looked like a man who had been fighting too long, carrying a burden that finally broke him. "Please," he said, "just let me in." She hesitated, then stepped aside. Edward crossed the threshold, dripping water on the floor. The room felt smaller with him in it, the air charged and trembling. He took off his coat and hung it by the fire without asking. Mary watched him. "Does she know you're gone?" "She will by morning," he said. "Margaret doesn't love me. She never did." She wants what the Blackwood name can buy her. And what do you want? He looked at her steadily. You. That's never changed. She turned away, heart pounding. Don't say things you'll regret when daylight comes. I've regretted every day I didn't say them. You're still bound to her, Mary said. By law, by honor, by everything that ever mattered to men like you. Honor, he said bitterly. My father used that word when he destroyed our letters. When he paid your husband to marry you and disappear. Tell me, where was honor then? She flinched. Stop. No, he said. I'm done pretending. He took 20 years from us. I won't give him another day. Edward. He stepped closer, his voice low. You can send me away if you must, but I'm not leaving because of them. I'll leave only if you tell me you don't feel what I feel. Mary's breath caught. The words hung in the air between them, heavy as thunder. She wanted to deny it, to end it before it began again, but she couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a whisper. You don't know what you're asking. I do, he said. I'm asking for one truth, nothing more. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. The truth is, I never stopped loving you. He closed his eyes for a moment, like a man struck by both pain and relief. Then that's enough. She shook her head. No, it isn't. Love doesn't feed a boy. It doesn't stop gossip or keep a roof over our heads. I'll work, he said. I'll find a way. I'm not the Lord's son anymore. I don't care about titles or estates. You don't know what a life like that means, she said. Poverty is a different kind of war. I've fought worse, he replied. Mary turned from him and sank into a chair, covering her face. You're mad. Maybe, he said softly, but I'd rather be mad with you than sane without you. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm. For a long time neither spoke. Then a knock startled them both. Mary rose quickly. No one can see you here. Edward moved toward the door, but she stopped him. Hide in the back room. He hesitated. Mary, go! He slipped into the small bedroom just as the door opened. Margaret Whitby stood on the threshold, rain beading on her fine cloak. Mrs. Collins, she said, her tone cold. I see I was right. Mary steadied herself. Miss Whitby, it's late. I followed him, Margaret said flatly. He left the estate like a thief in the night. I wondered where he'd go. I can't imagine why you'd come to me, Mary said. Margaret's gaze swept the room. Because this is where he hides. It always was, wasn't it? Even when you were just the gardener's daughter. Mary's hands clenched. You're mistaken. Am I? Margaret stepped closer, eyes gleaming. He told me he wouldn't marry me. He said his heart was elsewhere. I thought he meant freedom. But no, he meant you. Mary met her gaze without flinching. If he said that, then you have your answer. Oh, I have it, Margaret said. And so will the rest of Yorkshire by morning. The villagers already whisper about you. Imagine what they'll say when they learn you've taken the heir of Blackwood into your bed. Mary's face went white. You'll spread lies. I won't have to, Margaret said. You've given them the truth to twist. She turned toward the door, but Mary caught her arm. You don't have to do this. He's not yours to keep, and he never was. Margaret pulled free, her voice sharp. And what are you then, his salvation, his second chance? Don't flatter yourself. He'll ruin you like he ruins everything he touches. Mary's voice trembled but held firm. Leave my house. Margaret's eyes flicked toward the back room. Tell him this. I'll see him broken before I let him shame me. The estate, the land, his name, they'll all be mine. And when the papers are signed, he'll have nothing left but regret. She slammed the door behind her and disappeared into the rain. Mary stood trembling, the echo of the door still vibrating through the cottage. Edward stepped from the shadows. She followed me, he said. I didn't think— No, Mary interrupted. You never do. She won't keep quiet, he said. She'll make sure the valley turns on you. It already has, Mary said. But I won't let you destroy what's left of my life. He took a step forward. You think I came here to ruin you? I think you came because you don't know how to stop, she said. You bring storms wherever you go, Edward. He stopped, breathing hard. Then tell me what to do. Leave, she whispered. Before everything burns again. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. If that's what you want, it's what's right. He looked around the small room, his eyes softening. It feels like home, he said quietly. More than that empty manor ever did. Mary turned away, unable to answer. I'll go by morning, he said. You have my word. She said nothing. He walked to the door, opened it slightly, and paused. "If I can't give you a future," he said, "I can at least give you peace. Peace comes when people stop making promises," she said. He managed a faint smile. "Then I'll make none." When he left, the rain swallowed him whole. Mary sank into the chair again, staring at the dying fire. She wanted to cry but couldn't. Thomas came out of his room, rubbing his eyes. "Mother, who was that shouting?" "No one," she said quickly. "Go back to bed." He hesitated. "Was it him?" She didn't answer. The boy frowned. "I heard another voice. A woman's." "She was lost," Mary said. "It's nothing for you to worry about." Thomas studied her, sensing the lie. "You're crying." "I'm tired," she said softly. "That's all." He stepped closer and hugged her. "I like him, Mother. I don't care what people say." Mary froze. "What do people say?" "That you and Mr. Blackwood used to be sweethearts." Her breath caught. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Graham said it in town. Everyone heard. They laughed." Mary closed her eyes. "Go to bed, Thomas." When he was gone, she sat in silence for a long time. The fire burned down to embers. Outside, the storm eased into mist, and somewhere down the valley, a bell rang faintly from the manor. Edward was gone. Margaret would make sure the world knew, and by morning the life Mary had built, the quiet, fragile peace, would begin to crack apart. She rose and went to the window, staring out at the dark hills. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't know whether she was waiting for dawn or dreading it. Then, in the distance, a faint flicker of torchlight appeared on the road leading up the hill. It was heading straight for her cottage. The torchlight wavered closer, a single glow moving through the fog. Mary stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass. For a moment, she thought it was Edward returning again, reckless enough to defy everything. But as the figure came into view, she saw the tall, thin shape of the postman. He carried a bundle beneath his arm. She opened the door before he could knock. "Mrs. Collins," he said, tipping his cap. "Letter for you. Came down from the manor at dawn." Mary hesitated. "From whom?" "Couldn't say," he replied. "Only that it bears the Blackwood seal." Her heart sank. She thanked him and closed the door. The wax was unbroken, stamped with the crest she knew too well. She stared at it for a long time before sliding her thumb beneath the seal. The handwriting was Edward's. "Mary, I have left the manor. I will not marry Margaret Whitby. The cost is everything my family built, but I will not build more lies. I'm leaving Yorkshire for a while. There's something I must find, and when I do, I'll return. Until then, keep this letter. It holds proof that your land is yours, not theirs. I meant what I said last night. I will never ask forgiveness, but I will spend whatever life remains to deserve it. E. Blackwood." She read it twice, then pressed the page to her chest. The world felt too still. By noon, word had spread through the valley. Mrs. Graham came to her door with false sympathy and eager eyes. "Have you heard? The wedding's off. Miss Whitby left the estate this morning in a fury. They